I met a demon on the Tokyo subway. This story is a retelling of something that happened to me when I was 7 years old. As the years have gone by and I've grown up, I've realized that the story cannot possibly be true, yet I can't shake the feeling that it is. It happened in Tokyo, in the subway station. I was standing with my father when I saw the demon, a monstrously tall and furry creature with leathery black wings and a snout like an anteater. I must have stared at him for close to 10 minutes before he finally spoke, in a soft mutter that was clearly intended for his ears only. "This human is creeping me out," he said. "It almost looks like it's looking right at me." "I am looking right at you," I said. The demon nearly jumped out of his skin. "You can see me?" he asked. "Yes. Can everybody?" "Not unless they're in the 5th dimension." "Am I in the 5th dimension?" I asked. "Your mind must have slipped over here by mistake. What were you thinking about before you saw me?" I thought for a moment and then grinned. "Trains." "Oh, well, trains are the link between our dimensions. I guess your mind must have just wandered over here. Either that or you're going crazy." "I hope I'm not going crazy," I said. "Being crazy is a good thing in the 5th dimension," the demon replied. I laughed. "Do you have subway lines in the 5th dimension?" I asked. "Of course," he said. "How else would we get to work?" "You've got wings," I said. "Yes, but who wants to fly? Taking the train is so much faster, and if I fly to work, I'm all sweaty when I get there." "So what do you use your wings for?" I asked. "I put them over my head when it rains." "Can I see?" I asked. "Sure," the demon said. My hair blew back as he swooped his enormous wings over his head. I laughed again. "Dan." "You're funny," I said. The demon laughed too, but then his expression changed. "Are you okay?" I asked. "You seem sad." Yes, the demon replied, not looking at me but at something behind me. "Say, would you like to see a magic trick?" "Okay." The demon reached up and tugged a big rainbow handkerchief out of his snout. He must have pulled out 20 feet before he ran out. "That's funny," I laughed, but I stopped when I realized I wasn't holding my dad's hand anymore. I looked around and saw the subway station had disappeared, replaced by flowing green meadows that were full of old trains. "I can't see the subway station anymore," I said. "That's okay," said the demon. "Sometimes it's better to see what isn't there instead of what is." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes when I'm bored or sad, my mind slips off to the 3rd dimension, and I see people like you." "That's funny," I laughed. "Can you go to other dimensions too?" But the demon didn't answer. He was looking up at the sky. "It's starting to rain," he said, whooshing his wings up over his head. Warm droplets of rain hit my face. "Can I get under your wings with you?" I asked. "Not now," he replied. "You've got to go home." The world began to shimmer and flow together like different shades of green and golden paint, spinning around faster and faster in circles. I started to feel a little sick, and I closed my eyes. The world stopped spinning, but warm droplets of water still fell on my face. I opened my eyes and saw my mom crying over me, but I didn't see my dad. "Where's Dad?" I asked her. "Did he bring me home?" "Yes, darling," she said, although she didn't look at me when she said it. "He brought you home, and then he had to go away." "Oh," I replied. "When will he be back?" "I don't know," she said. My dad never did come back, and it was years before I found out the truth. He had killed himself that day. That morning he had written a note to my mother explaining that he intended to bring me along and step in front of the train with me. My mother found it when she got home from work and called the police, but it was too late to stop my father. The witnesses say that just before he jumped, I pulled away from his hand and ran off, fainting right after. But one of the witnesses, a little boy around my age, said that he saw something take my hand and lead me away from the speeding train. He said it was a monstrously tall and furry creature with leathery black wings and an anteater's snout. I am so freaking scared of moose. There's nothing that'll put the fear in you quite like those 7FT monsters with their huge demonic-looking antlers and all that shaggy, gross fur. And then there are these unholy noises they make. Like if your fight-or-flight instinct hasn't already been triggered by the sight of them alone, they'll just top it all off with those eerie hawa sounds. Honestly, I don't get how so many people are still so afraid of spiders knowing that something like a moose exists. You can always stomp on a spider. A moose will just straight up crash into your car. They're not usually all that aggressive towards humans, but when they're provoked, they will hurt you. Did you know more people get attacked by moose than by bears? Of course, there's the possibility that these victims did something to anger or frighten the moose in question before the attack, but who knows what rubs these things the wrong way. Maybe the moose just got aggravated on their own. So obviously, there are more than enough reasons to be scared of moose, even more than I listed above. That's right. I'm going to tell you something about moose that will convince even the ignorant few of you who think these animals are cute, gentle giants of the truth. Admittedly, this is more about one particular moose, but it's definitely cemented my fear of them. I grew up in the countryside. Where exactly, I don't want to say, but moose have been known to roam the area around my childhood home quite frequently. We used to own a small piece of land along with an old farmhouse, so I encountered all sorts of wild animals during my younger years. The moose that happened to wander onto our property never really got too close. They would sometimes come closer to the building to check it out, but for the most part they weren't interested in us, and neither were we. They always did give me the shivers though. No animal that isn't an elephant should be allowed to be this big. They're almost like nature got a good response to its release of the deer, and ended up escalating it in hopes of the result being another success. In fact, every time I was unlucky enough to spot one of these unholy creatures as a child, I would run straight into the arms of my mother and cling to her for dear life. My older brother always called me a sissy for doing so, and at the time I was usually very embarrassed afterward. But nowadays I believe I must have always known there was something off about moose. Like a seventh sense was telling young me to be extra careful. One night when I was about 11 years old, my mom, dad, and big brother were sitting in the living room playing a board game when we heard a sound that sent chills down my spine. It was the distinctly pitched, strange moose call. I jumped in my seat, knocking over the glass of juice on the table in front of me. My brother snorted and rolled his eyes at me. Aiden was about 16 at the time, and he wasn't afraid of anything. Being huge and kind of wide himself, he actually somewhat reminded me of a moose. My fear of them was therefore a regular source of amusement to him. My father nudged him in the side. "Leave her alone," he muttered. Turning to me, he added, "Did that spook you?" I nodded. "Get some paper towels to clean up that mess," Dad said flatly, gesturing at the small juice puddle on the floor. "And don't worry, moose can't walk through walls. It'll be gone in a moment." Unfortunately, he'd end up being very mistaken about that. I wiped up the spilled liquids, and just as I was about to sit back down, the moose hollered again. "Mom," I whined. "Sweetie, stop fussing. It'll go away in a bit." I'm sure she smiled at me across the cup of coffee she was holding to her lips. "It's just an animal. It doesn't mean any harm." "Moose are creepy," I insisted. "They're not like other animals. They're not right." "What's a right animal then, hon?" "A dog, or a cat, or an elk even, literally anything else." Mom laughed, not in a condescending way, but it made me feel like a baby nonetheless. "Just wait a little while. All right." I settled back in to finish the game, but I kept sneaking glances at the open window. The curtain in front of it obscured the view, but I was certain that the moose we were hearing was right there. It was probably just outside the window, ready to poke its ugly snout with that weird dangly thing on their necks inside. I shuddered when I imagined it looking in at me with its spooky, lazy eyes. "I'm gonna go to bed," I announced, rising from my chair. I didn't exactly feel like playing anymore. My brother groaned. "You're such a child, you know that? It's just a damn moose. It's probably shouting for its kid or something. They're big, but that's all. They're not even aggressive. Like, I've never gotten attacked by a moose. Neither has Dad. Have you?" "No, and I don't wanna," I replied. Aiden turned to look at Mom. "She's just doing this for attention, you know that, right? She thinks if she pretends to have this stupid moose anxiety, it'll make her more interesting facing me once more," he added. "No one gives a damn." Now that was just unnecessarily hurtful, and my parents seemed to think so too. My mom made an angry face at him, and my dad basically told him to shut up. Tell you something, son. If the moose ain't gone in an hour, you're going out there to take care of it. We'll see if you can shoo it off. Aiden turned a little pale. Dad gave him a meaningful look. I'm serious, he said sternly. Yeah, like I'm actually scared of that thing, my brother replied, regaining some of his old confidence. It's not going to attack me. I'll go out there right now, watch me. He got up and walked out into the hallway, over to the front door. Get back here, my dad shouted over his shoulder. Nope, you wanted me to chase off the moose. Now I'm chasing it off, my brother's voice rang out defiantly from across the room. You can't be serious, Mom growled, rising from her chair and marching over to the door herself, a furious look on her face. Now you're just being stupid. Leave the poor moose alone. You stay inside, AI. We heard the front door slam behind him. I remember thinking that my brother had to be the biggest dumbass who ever lived. My parents both rushed after him, Dad grabbing his shotgun on the way. Even though I really didn't want to, I couldn't help but follow them outside. As we stood on the porch together, the cold air caused me to shiver. It didn't take us long to spot the enormous silhouette of the moose on our lawn. It was a bull, a big one, even among his kind. His antlers were about as wide as I was tall, his long, dark brown fur hung off him like torn rags, and he was tapping his foot on the ground repeatedly. It was my ultimate nightmare. My brother, however, was walking right towards him, stomping and waving his arms. He hollered and shouted, jumping up and down as he attempted to make the massive animal turn and run off. Go, he yelled out again and again. Fuck off already. Leave it alone, my mother called out to him. Aiden, come back here. Leave it alone. He didn't listen. My father raised his shotgun. Don't shoot it, Mom warned him. I'm not gonna, it's just a warning in case he'll come at him, Dad muttered. I grabbed my mother's hand and squeezed it. I couldn't look away from the moose. My brother was now standing right in front of it, staring up at its long, floppy snout as it hovered above his head. And then it happened. The bull opened his mouth, and before any of us could react, a long arm shot out, grabbing my brother by the hair and pulling his head straight up into the gaping maw. Mom gasped. My father dropped his shotgun. I merely stood frozen in shock. Aiden was up to his shoulders inside the moose. The rest of his body, his arms and legs, were thrashing around in sheer, plain to see panic. Dad hurried to bend down and grab his gun, but it slipped from his trembling fingers again and again. No, he whimpered as he frantically tried to aim. A shot rang out, but he seemed to have missed as the moose didn't falter. It turned around and began to run towards the woods, only gaining speed as my father kept firing at it. Mom jumped off the porch to sprint after it, but by the time she'd reached the edge of the forest, the moose was long gone and Aiden was with him. She returned with wide, empty eyes, her face contorted in a look of utter horror. All the fucking police, she screamed from afar at the top of her lungs as she came staggering up to us. That's my boy. My boy. Call the cops or the fire department or anyone. Dad rushed back inside, and moments later I heard him yelling into the phone. A moose is eating my son. Come quick. It ran off with him. A moose is eating my son. It took him ages to convince the operator that he wasn't crazy and that they actually were supposed to send someone over. A police search actually did ensue but yielded no results. Nobody believed us about the arm that had come out of the moose's snout, of course. We were told we'd been in shock, that we'd imagined it. I don't blame them. Our story was far from a credible one. The entire incident was written off as a particularly tragic animal attack. Authorities came up with no leads on the whereabouts of my brother, despite their extended efforts. Not even the dogs could pick up on anything. To this day, there's no official explanation as to where Aiden disappeared, or where his body went. Everyone simply gave up after a few months. Again, I don't blame him. What else was there to do? Sure, I would have gladly had all hunters in the area shoot all the moose they came across, but when I pitched the idea, it received little to no attention. I missed Aiden dearly, and I do to this day. He was an asshole, that's true, but he was still my brother. My parents were never quite the same. We rarely speak about it nowadays, about Aiden in general. Moose don't come up anymore either. We moved away from the old house pretty soon after, too. There's one other thing that happened while we were still living at the old place, though, just a few weeks after the attack. I never told anyone this. I was lying in bed and I had trouble sleeping, so I listened to the few sounds of nature that reached my ears from outside my open window. The wind was blowing through the treetops and rustling in the bushes around the house, and somewhere, A lonely bird was calling out into the night. Suddenly this harmony was interrupted by a distinct and all too familiar noise, one that had always instilled fear in me. Ha. Ha. I sat upright, feeling my blood run cold. Without much thought, I climbed out of bed and padded downstairs into the living room. My parents had been fast asleep for hours, so I was all alone. I got up on my tiptoes and peered out the window facing the porch. The moon was just bright enough to illuminate a large figure standing right outside, a moose bull. Not anyone, though. It was him. All moose admittedly kind of looked the same, but it was definitely him. I don't know how, but I could tell. And in the dim silvery light, I could make out an object tangled up in his antlers. It had been licked almost entirely clean, and there were only a few bits of flesh still stuck to it. A human skull. I am terrified of my sister. My twin sister Anna got married to her fiancé Josh a few days ago. Anna and I have always been inseparable. She is my best friend. I was over the moon when Anna told me that she was engaged. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, I was almost as happy as she must have been when Josh asked her to marry her. On the day of the wedding, I had a doctor's appointment and went straight to the church from there. When I arrived, I met up with the other bridesmaids. I was surprised to see that they weren't wearing the pink dresses Anna had picked out. Instead, they were all wearing long, black dresses. I was still wearing jeans and a blouse, and Lillian, one of Anna's friends, asked rudely, "You're going to change, right?" I told her of course I was. I brought my dress with me. When I got back in my dress, they all looked at me in shock. Lillian snapped at me, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" I was so confused. Though I was supposed to be maid of honor, the bridesmaids would not let me talk to Anna at all. Instead of being with my sister on her wedding day, I had to sit in the back of the church. Even our mother agreed that I was not to go to the front wearing the dress. I honestly don't remember much of the ceremony. I was ashamed about apparently wearing the wrong dress, so I just sat in the back and kept my head down. All I remember is everyone crying a lot. When we arrived at my parents' house for the reception, I went to the fridge to get some beer I had bought. Now I know that beer is not exactly festive, but it was the brand Anna and I had drunk together when I turned 18. My parents taught us back then and were really angry, but I thought everyone would find it funny now. I was sure that Anna would. However, when my mom saw me with the beers, she grabbed them from me and angrily told me that I was disrespecting Anna. I said that I was sure that Anna would find it funny. My mom replied that I was out of line. I know that a wedding is a serious thing, but everyone was so solemn. You're supposed to have fun too, right? Everyone at the reception was acting strange around me, like I had done something really wrong. Every time I tried to talk to someone, they just left me standing there. Some people even seemed to look at me pitifully for some reason, but they still would not talk to me. The worst thing was that Anna kept avoiding me too. She looked really glum, which was strange because she had been looking forward to her wedding so much. She seemed to be making the rounds, but I never saw her talking to anyone. I finally decided to confront her. I told her that I was sorry about the dress, but that she hadn't told me about the change and I didn't know what I had done wrong. She didn't answer but looked at me with a look of disdain that she had never given me before. I then asked her why she wasn't with Josh and whether anything had happened between them that was upsetting her. She told me, "I'm not here for Josh. I'm here for you." I have no idea what that was supposed to mean. There is one thing that happened a few days before the wedding that I should mention. Anna didn't want a bachelorette party, but she, me, and a couple of friends went to get drinks to celebrate a little. That evening I really messed up. I was to be the designated driver. At first I drank only virgin coladas. The others were getting more and more drunk though, and they seemed to have a lot more fun than I did. I thought that one or two cocktails wouldn't hurt. The others were too drunk to realize what I ordered. At the end of the night I was more tipsy than I realized and ended up crashing Anna's car. Fortunately, nothing major happened. Anna only got a few scratches and I bumped my head pretty badly, but other than that, we did not have any injuries. Anna was really mad at first, but I thought she would have gotten over it by the wedding. My parents were really mad at me too after the accident. They cried a lot after the police told them what had happened. I think they were really disappointed in me. Josh came over that night too. Even he cried. I think he was really upset that my sister got hurt, even though her injuries weren't bad. I still feel really guilty about drinking and driving, and maybe the accident is the reason why everyone is acting so weird around me. Maybe Anna is still mad about it, but I feel she could have told me that instead of not telling me about the change of dresses and then being angry that I didn't know about it. The worst thing happened after I went to bed after the reception. I had just fallen asleep when Anna came into my room. She was still wearing her wedding dress. The white fabric almost seemed to glow in the darkness of my room. There were dark stains on her dress. By the looks of it, she had spilled red wine down the front. I think she must have been drunk because she started talking about how I had ruined everything, how it was all my fault, and how she would make me regret it for the rest of my life. Her face was distorted with rage. It almost looked unhuman. I was in shock. Her voice sounded weirdly raspy. Anna is a stressed smoker, so I guess she had gotten drunk on wine and smoked a few cigarettes. I started crying and asked her what she meant. She let out an unearthly shriek and jumped at me. She raised her hand as though to hit me, and I instinctively closed my eyes, but she must have missed me because all I could feel was a gush of cold air on my face. When I opened my eyes again, she had left. I woke up several times during the night and heard her wailing every time. Not just crying, wailing. The next night, she suddenly stood next to my bed. She was just standing there, wailing and showing no reaction when I tried to talk to her. I must somehow have fallen back to sleep with her standing there. I don't remember her leaving, just that she was suddenly gone. Since then, she has come to my room every night. Every time she wears her stained wedding dress. I don't know why she is tormenting me. I've been meaning to talk to her about it during the day, but she's always left the house before I get up. She just comes to my room at night, berating me, crying, and telling me that she will never let me have peace again. I told my parents about her behavior, but they refused to have a talk with her. They even said that I was imagining it. They said that I had to understand that Anna was not here anymore. I told them that I knew that she lived in an apartment with Josh now, but that she obviously came to our house every night. I'm really frustrated that they don't believe me. I don't want to go to bed tonight. To be honest, I am terrified of Anna. I was an astronaut, and I experienced something terrifying. In our childhood years, many of us fantasize about being astronauts. There's just something so compelling, so exciting, romantic about the idea of taking a voyage into that great black beyond, conquering the stars and the unknowns of our humble little galaxy for the good of mankind. And of course, zapping a few little green men along the way. However, few of us will ever fulfill these whimsical dreams. Being an astronaut and emissary of the cosmos takes more than just the ability to hold down your lunch after a turbulent takeoff. It's incredibly hard work, all physics and chemistry, and a good dose of good old-fashioned military resilience. Very few make the cut. But for this, you should be thankful. You see, I was an astronaut, and I don't think I'll ever be right again. Every night, the terrifying memories come back to fill me alive in my sleep. I wake up cold, drenched in my own sweat and tears, and lacking a breath in my lungs. All because of that one night. It started out perfectly normal, or as normal as it gets when squirting out a blob of toothpaste is harder than winning the Olympic relay. My companion and fellow spacefarer Robert had gone to bed much earlier than me, complaining of an uneasy stomach following the consumption of another of our less than savory rashes. "Just make sure you don't shit yourself, Bob," I had playfully chided. "You know how much work that'd be to clean up." Being sick in low gravity is an unpleasant experience, as I can personally assure you, so my sympathies were with Robert. However, as the evening drew on, and I got sick of losing to the onboard chess AI, over and over again I grew painfully bored. One of my favorite pastimes involved slowly taking off my shoes, watching as the stringy laces were enveloped by the snare of zero gravity and drifted upwards toward the ceiling of the cabin. Sure, it was childish, but don't judge me for it if you haven't tried it for yourself. Even the smallest things can amuse you in such a lonesome and otherworldly environment. As I watched my rubber soles take off like a shuttle above my head, that was when I heard it, faintly at first, but unmistakable in the complete silence of the cabin. Static. It was coming from one of the radios built into our helmets. For a moment I just sat there, mesmerized. Likely it was nothing. We were in space, surrounded by hundreds of satellites broadcasting multitudes of information. It was hardly out of the question that we were picking up a stray signal. And yet my gut told me it was something more. I got up out of my seat, floating across the corridor until I reached the locker for our spacesuits. The static grew louder when I reached for my helmet, so I knew which one of our radios needed a tune-up. I picked up the helmet and reached inside for the radio. and then stopped. "Hello?" Or there was a fucking voice coming out of the receiver. It startled me so much that I nearly yelped out loud, and I banged my head hard against the metal grill just a few inches behind me. "Ah. Hello? Is someone there?" I froze, still rubbing the back of my skull. What the hell was going on? We weren't due a check-in with Mission Control for another 2 days. Despite my concerns, I lifted up the radio and pressed it to my ear, and made the biggest mistake of my life. "Hello, this is Michael Stanton of the Rising Dawn. Do you read me? Over?" The voice came back to me almost immediately. It sounded frantic and breathless, and almost immediately I felt ill at ease. Thank God. I don't know how much longer I can last out here. If you hadn't come along. My heart started to race, hammering against my chest. "What's going on? Where are you communicating from?" "Over." "I'm right outside your ship, Stanton. Can you open the hatch door and let me in?" I think for a moment there my blood actually ran cold. There was no way anybody could be out there. There were no other human beings for hundreds of thousands of miles. We were alone up here, me and Robert. That had been the point. The voice became anxious when I didn't reply. "What are you waiting for, Stanton? Open the damn hatch and let me in." My mouth felt drier than sandpaper. My tongue was bloated, heavy like a wad of butter. No words would come. "Stanton, come on. Are you going to just leave me out here?" I found the strength to flick off the radio, letting it slip from between my fingers and drift through the air. I watched it go, relieved to be away from it. My chest was still pounding, and now I felt my fingers starting to quiver. I wanted to throw up, but nothing would come. The body gets used to harsh conditions, it just didn't know how to prepare for this. I pulled myself against the wall whilst I tried to catch my breath. I shut my eyes, trying to escape the endless blackness surrounding me, only to find another waiting for me beneath my eyelids. Then, when I thought it couldn't possibly get worse, I heard it. "Let me in." The voice wasn't like before. It sounded demonic, no longer humanoid at all, but deep, guttural, and fierce. The radio continued to float away, silent as the space that enveloped us both. The voice was coming through the walls from outside the ship. "Let me in." I could hear it breathing. It was raspy, heavy, and animalistic, somewhat akin to what I imagine a horned demon must sound like when it breathes. It scrabbled against the body of the ship outside, scratching as though pawing for a way inside. For a couple of merciful moments it went silent. Then the cabin was filled with a cacophony of metallic drumming as whatever was outside started to smash the side of the ship with whatever equivalent to hands it possessed. The sound was relentless, drowning out any and all thoughts that might have been running through my head. I pushed away from the wall and over to the opposite side, desperate to be away from the source of the banging. It cut out suddenly, leaving the cabin with only my whimpering audible, but after a couple of seconds, it started up again on that side too, that awful, harrowing scream continuing. "Let me in. Dave. Let me in. Let me in." I must have blacked out at some point under the sheer duress of the whole thing, because my next memory was Robert slapping my face. Night had come and gone, and the cabin was silent once more. Somehow he had slept through the whole thing. I was incredulous for a bit. I believed I must have imagined the whole experience. But then we found my radio was missing from my helmet, and the reality of the whole nightmarish ordeal started to sink in. Nobody believed me. They all told me what I was describing was impossible. Sounds like the ones I was hearing couldn't possibly travel in a vacuum. Robert, for all of the depth of friendship we had achieved whilst holed up together for 2 years, thought I was nuts. Well, screw him, because everything that happened to me was real. Absolutely real. Even now, a whole 20 years after I came back home, the memories are more vivid than ever. No amount of forced therapy or visits with gangly, patronizing psychiatrists will ever free me from them. They are a part of me now. But it's okay. Because you believe me, don't you? The supernaturally inclined, the believers. Here in the 21st century, we are all so accepting of one another. There's always an ear willing to receive. So that's why I'm writing this here. The story of Rising Dawn and the thing that tried to attack us. The thing that was alive in the vacuous cold of space without protection. The thing that's still up there. Somewhere. Something terrifying is in my backyard. I have a very real problem marching on four legs, I think, around my property. My wife and I got tired of living in the city. We both had jobs in consumer banking, and we got so tired of the pissy rich people, the traffic jams on the commute, and the very mediocre place that we lived, so we moved out to a little parcel of land about an hour away from the big city life that we so despised. I got it for a good deal, and we looked forward to starting a new life of quiet domestic bliss. I wanted to while away my days working on a little internet site that I'd started, and my wife decided to start writing children's books. When we first looked at the place with the realtor, I noticed one strange thing about it. At the farthest corner of our 4-acre plot, there was a little square of land maybe 3 feet wide where the land was barren. Lush grass was sprouting everywhere around it, so thick that I suspected I'd have trouble pushing a mower through it, everywhere but this one spot that wouldn't have looked out of place in Death Valley. I asked the realtor about it. She shrugged. I quickly forgot about it. Our dog, Horace, didn't forget about it even once. From the day we moved in, he was all over it. When we pulled up in the car and opened the door, he bolted straight for the spot and circled it like a shark, sniffing the edges, but never crossing onto the grassless area. It took 4 days and several trips back to the city to ferry all of our things over, and Horace generally had to be forced away from the dead zone. I'd go out at night and physically lift him up and carry him back to the house. It was weird, but we were busy, and he was already kind of a weird dog. He would eat the dirt and potted plants, much to my wife's chagrin, so his weird obsession with the soil wasn't totally alarming to us. Once we had settled down, though, my wife wanted to take him to the vet. He hadn't stopped. He spent every day from dawn until dusk circling the spot, sometimes crouching and watching it. I finally gave in when I got up late one night to get a glass of water and saw that Horace was sitting patiently at the back door, staring outside, watching. If he was sleeping at all, I hadn't seen it. The vet showed up at our house. My wife paid extra for a house call and watched the dog. He expressed concern because, of course, Horace had lost a lot of weight. Constant exertion, and no breaks to eat or sleep. It was a recipe for disaster. My wife was distraught. Hell, I was too. We decided to crate him and force him to rest, and I resolved to dig up the spot in the morning and see if there was a toxic waste barrel or something that was messing with him. I was already too late. When we woke up in the morning, Horace was gone. The thick molded plastic that surrounded the metal grate had been gnawed through, and flecks of the wreckage were mixed with 3 of my dog's teeth in a trail of dried blood that led to the back door. How he got out of the back door, I'm not sure. It's possible we left it unlocked. We'd certainly done that sort of thing before. I told my wife to stay in the bedroom, and I followed the trail, steeling myself for the very real possibility that I might have to kill my dog if he wasn't dead already. Horace was sitting just outside of a freshly dug hole where the bald spot had been, his muzzle crimson, an object in his mouth. He looked far from rabid. In fact, for the first time since the move, he was positively calm. His tail thumped enthusiastically when I approached, as if he wanted me to stop my crouching defensive walk toward him and be friendly. I patted him on the head carefully, watching his teeth, the ones that were left the whole time. The hole was empty. I expected a fight when I took the object, but he offered it freely, staring up at me and panting happily. It was a small, very old hand mirror. The ornate decoration was silver, and the glass had faded to black. It was definitely an antique. I thanked Horace, and when I told him to come with me into the house, he followed with no trouble. Whatever madness had seized hold of him must have been exorcised with the mirror. My wife still cried and hugged him and kept sticking her fingers into his mouth to check out his teeth, which made me uncomfortable, but I decided not to press it. I figured that if the mirror was as old as I suspected, it might sell for enough to pay for the doggy dental work he'd need. I chalked it up to one of those interesting rural anecdotes that I'd so craved when I was slaving away in an urban wasteland, put the mirror on a table for later appraisal, and we went on about our day. That night we woke up to Horace's whimpering. He slept at the foot of our bed, but now he was wedged deep under it, a puddle of rank piss spreading on the wood floor. A chill ran down my neck, and I could feel the hairs stand up on my arm. Maybe it was a smell or a chill that I couldn't consciously detect, but I knew something was horribly wrong. I hurried to the window, but my city boy instincts failed me. Well-lit streets are hard to come by when you're a mile from the nearest neighbor, so all we had was the porch light, which was off. The moonlight wasn't illuminating much at all. but I felt my legs go weak and my stomach heaves in primal recognition of true danger outside my new home. Something very large, the size of an elephant at least, was moving out there. I could hear the rumble of its breath from my window, and I had the impression that this menacing shadowy monster could smash through the side of the house with ease. My whimpering had brought my wife to my side, and she muffled a scream when she saw the hulking shadow. For his part, Horace hadn't stopped whimpering. I could hear it moving out there. Actually, I could feel it moving. Each step sent a tiny vibration up through the wood floors in our house. I stifled the urge to take my wife and run out of the back door, and it's good that I did. Anything with a stride that long would be fast, and it was prowling around our entire house in a patient circle. I grabbed my little .357, horribly aware of its inadequacy, and took my wife and Horace and hid in a closet. We held each other and dialed 911 and cried. The dispatcher was not amused, but once we had convinced her that we weren't kidding around, she dispatched someone. The policeman arrived at 5 in the morning, as the dawn was breaking, and hammered on the door. There was no monster to be found, not that you'd have to look hard to find it. We convinced him that we were in earnest, and he gave us helpful tips like keep the porch light on and invest in some bear spray. That was the end of the first horrible night 2 nights ago. It came back again last night. My wife was reduced to hysterics, and I kept her in the bathroom with a paper bag and Horace. I had to watch the thing. I still couldn't see it very well, even with a floodlight trained on the spot behind the door. It was dark and black and strong. Anything else I could use to describe it would be the conjecture of a desperate man. The most maddening part was that it didn't seem to be doing much at all. It was only prowling, 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 as if it was waiting for something. An attack order? Or was it looking for something? Did it not know we were in the house? I ventured down into the lower level of the house, hoping to get some perspective or insight on it. The first thing I noticed was the mirror, sitting on our table, the darkened glass, glowing with an eerie light in the dark. I still don't know how I swallowed my panic. Even thinking about it, the shock of it, makes me want to pack up my things and drive until I'm out of the state. I crept over to it, as scared as I've ever been, lifted it up, and peered in. At first, I couldn't see much besides my own dim reflection. Then shapes crept in behind me. 2 shadows, indistinct, stood behind me. I checked, trying not to cry, but no one was really behind me. I didn't have time to dwell on it. A horrifying roar bark rents the relative quiet of the night, loud as a jet engine. It shook the house, and then my wife was screaming and Horace was howling, and I put down the mirror. We huddled up, waiting for more barks, but there was nothing. We made it through till this morning. I'm not an idiot. I know that this has something to do with the ancient mirror Horace dug up, and I need to get it the hell away from my family. When I tried to take it out of the house, Horace charged me, sank his teeth into my leg, and wouldn't let go. He was not playing around. I shook him off with a decidedly non-violent assist from my wife, but he sprinted out of the house, and he was perched outside by our car. I can't go anywhere near it without him going into attack mode, at least as long as I have the damn mirror. My dear wife is having a total break with reality, I think. She says that Horace must be right, and that the mirror has to stay with us, but she's getting more and more erratic as the daylight winds down because the beast is going to come back. I'm seriously considering just putting her in the car and leaving the mirror and anything non-essential to rot. On the other hand, nothing has really happened. It's intimidating, but the shadow beast hasn't actually done anything but bark once. I didn't bust my ass for 15 years doing drudge work so that I could abandon the hard-won fruits of my labor over a mirror that my dog has dug up. It sounds ridiculous when I phrase it like that. Honestly, I think I'm just tired, and I'm not sure how to proceed, but I'm running out of time. If only I could sleep on it. Something went wrong with my heart transplant. I've always had a weak heart. Not just physically, I've always been afraid of my own shadow. It was unsurprising when the doctors told me my heart murmur wasn't just a heart murmur. A year of tests, a year of therapy, constant trips to the hospital, and I was finally told that it had all been for nothing. My poor weak heart wouldn't last till Christmas. It's a strange thing being told that you're dying. I didn't come to terms with it at first. I drank and I spent my money. I did reckless, stupid things because I was so damn scared. Then I got the news that a young woman called Laura had been declared brain dead, and that I, the lucky chosen one, would be getting a brand new heart a week later. I drove to the hospital slowly and carefully, and readied myself for the ordeal that was to come. As I was lying in bed on the last night, the thought of Laura swirled around in my head, and it wouldn't leave me alone. It was like her name was in flashing lights every time I closed my eyes. It was wrong. I know it was, but I had to see the woman who was giving me her heart. It didn't feel right not to put a face to the one who was saving my life. I knew her name, I knew what ward she was staying in, I had overheard the two nurses discussing it. I wandered down the meandering hallways until I found what I was looking for, taking my time, and making sure I didn't miss any name. I guess I have time on my hands now. In the second to last room, she lay in bed. A woman sat on the bed next to her, holding her hand, and my own weak heart stuttered. Excuse me, I had no idea what to say to her. I'm Jenna. I'm the person. I'm having surgery tomorrow, and what I assumed was Laura's mother stood up, and I could tell from the look in her eye that she knew who I was. Thank you for visiting. I know it's strange, but a part of her is going to be living in you. I wanted to meet you. I stood there, helpless and lost for words. Laura's mother beckoned me over. Please, she said. Don't feel uncomfortable. It's what she would have wanted. I sat on the chair next to Laura. How did she? I broke off. It was too awful to ask. Laura's mother gave me a thin smile. She was a care worker. Looked after battered wives and abused women. Last month she met a guy and, well, I suppose years of training can't help you when you're in love. She ignored the warning signs, and he killed her. She dedicated her life to those who needed her. Laura's mother looked down. I don't know why I did it, but I reached over and held Laura's hand. I squeezed it. I'm so sorry. I had a boyfriend once who, he was like that too. Someone like Laura convinced me to leave. Laura's mother gave me another half smile. I could see the tears in her eyes. Then Laura squeezed my hand, tightly. She gripped me so hard that her fingernails dug into my skin. I recoiled, a look of horror on my face. Laura's mother looked at me calmly. She squeezes my hand sometimes as well. I think the doctors called it muscle spasms. Either way, there's none of Laura left in there anymore. I looked at the small crescent moons that had just started to bleed in the palm of my hand. The surgery went perfectly. I was wheeled to the recovery suite after it was over and done with, the raised wound on my chest covered by gauze. It was better if I didn't see it, I thought. I didn't need any more heart issues. I spent the first day doped up on the pain medication, eating only a little, and sitting up maybe 2 times. It was a long process. They reassured me. Laura's mother came to visit me the day before I was due to leave. Her calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but I could see that she was suffering. She looked 10 years older, and her hands shook when she gave me a hug. When are you going home? Tomorrow, I told her. Please come visit whenever you want. I started to jot down my address for her when out of the corner of my eye, a flash of blonde disappeared through the doorway, the same brilliant blonde as Laura's hair. Oh, I cried out suddenly. It felt like someone had sharply squeezed my hand so hard it had almost crushed the bones. Laura's mother rushed to my side, a look of concern in her eyes. What's wrong? Is it your heart? She stumbled over the last words, coming to terms with what she had said. I tried to reassure her and said I'd let the doctors know, and she left with a look of worry on her face. When I looked down, a new set of crescent fingernail marks were below the ones that Laura had made. 10 identical bleeding smiles. The taxi ride home was short, and before I knew it, I was back in my own flat. It felt strange to try and slot back into where I had left off. My life had been almost over the last time I had been here. I looked over the mess and the cardboard boxes, the remnants of one night where I had tearfully tried to pack and store my belongings so my parents wouldn't have to do it when I died. Laura's heart beat so strongly it felt like it would come out of my chest. It did this all the time, and I realized this was what a healthy heart must feel like. So why couldn't I shake my feeling of unease? That night I had a dream. Laura was in her hospital bed, but her mother was gone. I could hear my heart, Laura's heart, beating in my eardrums so loudly it was painful. I tried to cover them, but my hands were pinned to my sides. Some unexplainable force was moving me towards the motionless figure of Laura on the bed. Her lips were blue and the window had come open, whipping her blonde hair around her face. I was almost on top of her when her eyes flew open. They were milky white, the eyes of someone dead. Get out, she rasped, her voice guttural. I could hear the heartbeat faster and faster, drumming until I thought I couldn't take it anymore. Then I woke up. The sound had been real. Laura's heart was so loud it felt like it would rupture my eardrums, and I screamed in agony, trying to cover my ears. It was useless. It was coming from some deep place inside me. I could feel it reverberating around the hollows of my chest. I stumbled out of bed, gasping for air, and tried to find my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone, an ambulance, or my mom. Anyone that would pick up. "Get out," it was a faint whisper over the hammering thumps of Laura's heart, a low guttural voice that sounded like it had been made by an animal, and I crawled to the door, down the hallway, choking on my screams for help. My neighbor opened the door. His eyes were as wide as saucers at the sight of me on the floor, clutching my chest. He drove me to the hospital as I cried in the passenger seat of his car. After about 50 different checkups, the doctors told me that absolutely nothing was wrong with me. They told me my heart was regular, my blood pressure was normal, and that everything was going just swimmingly. I stood in the waiting area, wallowing in my shame and frustration. That heart didn't belong to me. My phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number. Great. That was all I needed. More unexplained, scary things like a stranger on the end of the phone. My voice sounded small on the line. "Hello. Good morning, this is the Thames Valley Police. We've called to report an incident that occurred in your flat at around 1:30 a.m. today." I felt a wave of embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I recently had surgery and I wasn't feeling well. I had to have my neighbor drive me to the hospital, and I think I panicked a little in the hallway. Before I left, there was a small silence on the other end of the phone. I'm afraid this is something you might want to be sitting down for." I felt Laura's heartbeats, strong and calm. "There was an incident of forced entry by Mr. Samuel Matthews. According to our police records, he's your ex-partner and you filed a restraining order against him in September 2017. My blood ran cold. I did. He's in police custody. We found an automatic weapon on him, and we believe he had the intent to harm you. We have an officer currently stationed at your flat who can fill you in depending on how long your hospital stay will be." I thanked him and hung up the phone. For a moment I leaned against the wall, the horror slowly spreading over me. If I had been in my flat 10 minutes later, he would have found me. Laura's heartbeats filled my ears again, but now they were gentle, calming. Her mother said she dedicated every part of her to helping those who needed it. I put both my hands on my chest, overwhelmed by my own gratitude, and listened to Laura. I let something into my house. I've lived in this house for almost a decade. We've never had the slightest hint of paranormal activity. No phantom footsteps, no slamming doors, no shadow people, nothing. Until yesterday. I'd had a weird day. I'm a psychologist, and I had a somewhat stressful session with a teenage girl. Obviously can't get into specifics because of privacy and all that, but it was stressful. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but on my way home I kept glancing in my rearview mirror. It was just instinct. There was no one tailgating me, flashing their high beams or anything. In fact, I was alone on the winding country road that led up to my house. I just kept glancing in the rearview mirror without even thinking about it. When I got home, the house was chaos, as usual. Our daughter was running around with stickers, putting them on everything. My poor husband was hopelessly unsticking each one, at about half the speed she was putting them on. "Need help?" I asked. "No, but could you make some chicken nuggets?" I walked over to the fridge, and that's when I saw it. There was a dirty handprint on the freezer door. But the problem was, the hand was small yet too high up to be my kid's. I stared at it for a second, confused. I guess Seth was carrying her, and she touched the fridge. I grabbed the dish towel and rubbed it off. We got Lily into bed around 8. I was nearly falling asleep as I read her a story. As I said, it'd been a hard day. My words drawled as I read Goodnight Moon for the zillionth time. My arm felt like lead on the pillow. But then Lily said something that woke me right up. "Mommy," she said, "who's the girl in the fireplace?" I looked down at her. "The girl in the fireplace," she repeated, indignant. Who is she? My throat went dry. There's no girl in the fireplace. There is, she insisted. The girl with no face. She was sitting in the fireplace. Okay, let's go to bed, I said, though my heart was pounding. Time to sleep. After she fell asleep, I asked Seth about it. Didn't say anything to me about it, he said. But that's creepy as fuck. I know. I wanted to just go to sleep and forget about it. But eventually my anxiety got the better of me. Sometimes we leave the door unlocked. Sometimes Sammy, the girl a few doors down, comes over unannounced to play with Lily. What if she got stuck in the fireplace or something? What if she's asphyxiating in there right now? The logical part of my brain knew that was ridiculous. I would have seen police cars outside their house. Tanya would have called me to see if Sammy was over here. There would have to be like 5 super unlikely things that would all have to happen for Sammy to be trapped in our fireplace, dying. Still, I had to go check. I'm just going to check the fireplace, I said, starting for the door. Seth laughed. She scared you. Just. I'll be right back. I'm sure it's nothing. Lily says weird shit all the time. I walked downstairs and turned left into the darkened family room. I reached for the switch and flicked on the light. Just in time to see thin strands of long black hair retract into the chimney. I froze. My skin prickled. I couldn't move as I stared at the fireplace, the place where I'd just seen no. Could it really be? That would mean someone was inside the chimney, hanging upside down. I finally sucked in a breath. Seth. He shot down the stairs. What's wrong? He asked as he ran into the room. Someone's in the chimney. I saw their hair. Seth frowned. I could tell he didn't really believe me. Okay, he said slowly, calmly. He approached the fireplace. Hello? Nothing. He paused for a second. Then he grabbed the fire poker and got on his hands and knees. Gripping the poker in one hand and his phone with the flashlight in the other, he slowly pushed his head into the fireplace and looked up. There's nothing there, he said. The flue's open though. So good thing we checked. He pulled his head back out and closed the flue. It clanged shut. I didn't open the flue, I said. Neither did I. I guess we left it open after the last time we lit a fire, which was... shit. Like 2 weeks ago. Man, that's probably like $50 of heat we've been paying for. He started for the stairs. Are you sure there was nothing there? Absolutely positive, he replied. I swallowed. Had I imagined it as a psychologist, I knew the brain was a funny thing. A bit of hair or dust in our peripheral vision can seem like a face or a shadow person to our brain. Our brains are programmed to recognize faces, humans, and danger, like seeing faces in patterns, pareidolia. I got on my hands and knees and looked up into the chimney just to make sure the flue was closed. Then I headed back upstairs. Something woke me up in the middle of the night. I rolled over and looked at the clock. 3:07 a.m. I closed my eyes and tried to fall back asleep. But then I heard it. Clang. A muffled, metallic clang. Coming from inside the house. Clang. I shook Seth awake. As he was getting his bearings, I ran over to Lily's room. Relief flooded me as I saw her fast asleep in bed. Seth stumbled into the hallway. What is that? He whispered. I don't know, should I call the police? Clang. This sound was louder than the others. And then... thump. Coming from our family room. Seth ran down the stairs. I heard his footsteps recede into the family room, and for an agonizing moment, there was silence. Then he shouted, "Call the police, now." When the police arrived, I realized why he was so panicked. There were sooty footprints on our family room floor. Bare feet, small, like those of a child. They wound in a sinusoidal pattern until fading and disappearing when they got halfway across the room. There were no footprints leading back, and the flue was open again. I don't know what to do. The police didn't find evidence of anything. They insist the footprints must have been caused by Lily. I know they weren't. She was fast asleep, and she told me she didn't make them. And I keep thinking back to that stressful session I had with that teenage girl. During the session, she was upset, and she grabbed my hand. A little weird and boundary crossing, but she was crying and desperate for comfort. When she finally removed her hand, there was this blackish, sooty smudge on my hand. I figured it was just some eyeliner or mascara or something, even though she looked like she wasn't wearing any. Now I'm not so sure. This morning, I dialed her number to schedule her next appointment, and all I got was a robotic voice telling me the number had been disconnected. I saw something on the evening news that I can't explain. My work friends and I were out at our favorite pub last night. Not a really fancy place, but, cheap beer and close enough to home that I don't have to drive. The night started out normally enough. The four of us crammed into a small table off in the corner, mostly talking shop and shitting on our boss. Being this was the middle of the week, there weren't too many other people around, maybe around 8 or 9 others in the whole place. Everybody just kind of keeping to themselves, sort of people you'd expect to see in a pub on a Wednesday. Anyway, from where I'm sitting, I have a pretty good view of the TV behind the bar. Jesse, the bartender, is kind of lazily flipping through channels and passes by our local news channel. There's a brief burst of orange and red on the screen, which I register as a fire happening somewhere, which then disappears as Jesse switches over to the next channel. Something about the image looks oddly familiar, though. "Hey Jess, can you switch that back?" I call out to her. The news comes back on, and suddenly I recognize the building in the frame. It's my building, and it's burning. "Holy shit," I say, loudly enough that a few people follow my gaze to the television. That's my apartment. The crowd in the bar falls kind of quiet, everybody's staring up at the screen now. The screen shows a wide shot of the outside of my building. The camera must be set up on the north end of the block because I recognize a lot of shops on the ground floor: property management, dry cleaner, convenience mart, etc. The top left corner of the building is aflame. It's not a huge fire by any means, but it looks like a few units between the top 4 floors or so have already been engulfed by the flames. "Jesus, man," one of my coworkers says. That sucks." There's an uncomfortable murmur of agreement that passes around the table. I mean, I don't blame them. I wouldn't know what to say in this situation either. "Yup, I agree," just as awkwardly. Thankfully, my apartment is only about halfway up and located on the west side of the building. I cross my fingers, hoping my stuff will be okay. The camera cuts to a reporter on the scene. He's standing a little further away, looking at the shops in the background. I can tell he's across the street on the northwest corner of the building. Firefighters are expected on the scene any moment. He's saying, and hopefully they'll be able to contain this horrible inferno before it spreads any further. As I was saying before, it's very fortunate that everyone was able to evacuate the building before things got too bad, or who knows what tragic events may have unfolded. He's really laying it on thick, my other coworker jokes. I chuckle a bit. All things considered, at the moment it really didn't seem all that bad. But then, a few moments later, hang on, the reporter on TV says, "We're getting some updated information. It seems. Hang on one moment, while we readjust the camera." The previously locked down camera starts to shift, the angle focusing on an area of the building about halfway up the west side. All the lights in the building are out except for one. I feel a weird creeping sensation as I start counting the windows from the bottom. 5 up, 2 over. That's my place. I swore I turned that light out, I think, at first. Then I see it. There's a person standing in my window. The camera zoomed out too far to make out any features, but it definitely looks like a man, and it's definitely standing in my apartment. I watch petrified as the camera zooms in closer, the reporter babbling on about the overlooked, ill-fated, trapped in the blazing such and such. As the image gets closer, I start to make out more details. The person is dancing, or something. I don't really know how to describe it, but he's moving around a lot, and everything he's doing has this bizarre rhythmic quality to it. He starts waving his arms in the air, back and forth, and then he's waving them up and down at his sides. Then he's banging both fists on the glass. Then he's waving his arms over his head again, back and forth. Everything he's doing is to the exact same tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He starts jumping up and down, waving his arms over his head like he's trying to get someone's attention from a long distance, but everything is to the exact same rhythm, over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. What in the fuck, I say, my voice a hoarse whisper. And then the camera gets a little closer, and finally we can make out the person's features. It looks almost exactly like me. It's wearing the exact same clothes that I'm wearing now, clothes I changed into moments before leaving the apartment earlier. Its face looks almost exactly like mine as well, except for its eyes. Its eyes are far too big for a normal person. It also has this almost comical look of horror on its face. I don't even know how to describe it. Imagine if someone were pretending to look scared but as a joke. It would have almost seemed funny if the circumstances were different, but instead it was just extremely unnerving. No one in the bar is talking now. Everyone is fixed on the TV. The person is still swaying and waving around, beating his hands on the glass or jumping in circles. I almost don't hear the reporter mention the fact that firefighters have rushed into the building and are now heading for my floor. Oh God, I think, without really understanding what was happening. Please don't go in there. I stare transfixed at the screen. From this angle, you can just barely see the top of my front door through the window, not too far behind where this creature is flailing around. Right now it is holding its face in its hands and shaking its head from side to side as if saying no. Suddenly the door behind it bursts open as, presumably, the firefighters have entered my apartment. The creature stops moving. For a second, I see its expression change. The comical look of horror is gone, replaced by a huge smile filled with enormous, pointed teeth. Then the lights go out. We all just sat there, staring at the screen as the camera slowly zoomed out from the now dark window. No one says anything as we all quietly pay our bills and leave. I went directly to my sister's place across town and asked to stay with her. I told her there was a fire at my apartment, and that's it. When I tried to find footage from the news online later that night, it seemed like they had edited that last part out. I don't know if any of you on this subreddit know what that thing was, but I hope they didn't put out that fire. I hope they let the whole fucking place burn to the ground. This is the final story in this video. I found something as a child and now it's coming back to haunt me. When I was a child, I lived on an old farm. There were 80 acres of cornfields and woods behind the house. This farm had been around for a long time. It was a rest stop for people on the Oregon and Santa Fe trails back in the 1800s. While I lived there, I loved to explore the land. I would ride four-wheelers to the woods and hop off and walk around seeing if I could find anything cool. One day I found some old stones that had writing on them. They had names on them, and as I was just beginning to learn to read and write, I grabbed another rock and scraped my name below one of the other names. I told my parents and they thought I was joking, so I told them I'd show them. I took them back to where I found them, but they weren't there anymore. I knew where I had found the rocks, but they were gone and my parents assumed I was playing pretend and had quite the imagination. After this, I spent most of my days trying to find those rocks again. That's when I met Mary. She was a little girl about my age who was in the spot where I found the rocks. She wore funny clothes, but she was very nice. We would play for hours in those woods. Now that I look back, I did find it odd she never left the tree line though. I wanted to introduce my new friend to my parents, but Mary said that was a bad idea, as they wouldn't be able to see her. I was confused. Why would my parents not be able to see her? I can see her just fine. She told me she had died a long time ago. That's why she wore the funny dress. She told me that a bad man had killed her and carved her name into a rock. She said since I put my name on the rock, we would play together forever. I laughed and told her we would be friends forever. I realized it was getting dark, and I made my way out of the woods and back home. That night my parents told me that we had to move. I was upset. Who was Mary going to play with? Will I be able to see her again? I went to the woods again the next day and Mary and I played for a while. Then I told her that my parents said we were moving and that I wouldn't be able to see her for a while. She got very angry. She started to yell at me and told me that I made a promise when I put my name on that rock. She grabbed my arm and was a lot stronger than me. She was hurting me, and I finally managed to slip out of her grip and run out of the woods. She was right behind me, but as I crossed the tree line, she stopped and screamed. I was very scared and was crying, trying to apologize. We moved to our new home, and I was scared to go outside at first, but as the weeks passed, I got more and more comfortable going outside. I was confident that Mary wasn't going to get me. I finally told my parents about her, and they encouraged me to have imaginary friends. I let them finally convince me she was imaginary, and I continued being a kid. Years went by and I forgot about her. I forgot about the countless hours I spent in those woods. I forgot about scratching my name on that rock. I'm 28 now and have moved to a town close to the house where I grew up. I took my dog on a walk and we went on a little trail through some woods behind our apartment building. My dog went off the trail a bit and started digging at something. I bent down to see what it was. It was that rock, with all those names on it. At the bottom I saw the name Mary, and below that was my name. Except it wasn't just scratched in there, it was fully carved into it. I stood up and turned around and went back to the trail with my dog, and when I turned around to look back at the spot where the rocks were, there she was, Mary. That's when all of those memories came flooding back. I remembered all the times we played in those woods of my childhood home. I remember how much fun we had and the smiles and laughs we shared. Then I remembered how I moved and how angry she was. That's when I noticed her eyes. They were sinister, and not the kind eyes I had remembered. She stood there smiling. I pulled my dog and we ran back home. I can't believe this is happening. How did she get here? Why is she here? I don't know what to do. It's been 2 weeks and I haven't looked at the woods at all, and I refuse to stay outside longer than 10 minutes now. Last night I heard something tapping my window. When I looked, there was nothing. My partner is getting worried because I am talking more in my sleep and saying the name Mary. My partner told me that last week got out of bed and walked to our balcony and just stared out towards the woods. I am also having dreams about the woods and that damn rock. I saw the silhouette of a man carving my name into it with Mary standing next to him. The dream ended when she saw me and smiled. I'm starting to hear her say my name, calling for me. I no longer feel safe in my apartment. I swear she has made her way in here. I see movement out of the corner of my eyes every so often, and it always looks like that funny old dress sweeping behind a corner. Today I saw her in the mirror and I turned to look behind me and there was no one, but when I turned back, there was now a dark figure, male figure behind me. I felt a cold blast of wind hit me. I woke up on the floor a few hours later after my partner had shaken me awake. What is going on? I have to end this. I have to end this not only for myself but for the sake of my partner. They don't deserve to be affected by the torture that Mary is putting me through. I'm sorry if this story feels sporadic, but I am terrified and lost. I think tomorrow I am going to go out to the woods and try to end this. I will update this if I find an answer. If nothing is added here, well then I guess I'll be playing in those woods with Mary forever.